Hey y'all.
What up? What up?
What up, Keontae? So
You really-
Keontae, is the apostrophe really after the E? Or do you just not know how to put it over the E? Because the way that you do it is you hold down the E. Well, it depends on what laptop you got. But if you have a Mac, you hold down the E and then it'll give you all different types of E's. And then you can put the apostrophe over the E. But if it's supposed to be after the E, what's up?
What's wrong with you? Starting.
I'm just trying to reach the masses. What up, Ashy Knuckles?
Oh my goodness.
And Keontae, if you are here, are you Chris Seeley's child by any chance? If not, that's okay too. Hey, all four of y'all watching was good.
This is okay.
Did we even oh yeah, we did. We posted on social media yesterday. I'm like, did we forget to post?
He said no.
No. Okay, no, you're not Chris Seeley's child, or no, the apostrophe is not supposed to be above the E. Oh, Ashy Knuckles, you gonna be at the thing in Indianapolis. Well, shit. Let me tell you something. I might be boycotting that shit. I'm undecided.
I've had a conversation about this.
Oh. No, Chris Seeley is a woman, and she's a philosophy professor at Penn State. Okay, but you no relation.
Not my daddy, not my mama either.
TWAS. What does that stand for? Oh no, I'm bringing y'all gifts. I'll give you my address. I'm just playing. I'll probably pull up. I don't, but y'all, we gotta we have to balance big tent politics with holding the line against charlatans, is what I'm saying.
That's all you're gonna say about it?
Yeah. Because I'm not
fair.
Yeah, and after reading the Dean Spade book, it's like, I'm not trying to start a campaign. You feel me? I'm not trying to be unprincipled. The mutual aid book is like.
Although I'm not going to say anything particular, but I do think in this regard, I don't know that this will be like starting a campaign, because I think that there are some ethical concerns.
Yes, agreed. Thanks, TWOF. What does TWOF stand for? TWOF. Thank you. I enjoyed that conversation with Jared. Millennials are killing capitalism.
Yo, I have been having junk food cravings lately.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I ate a cinnamon roll today.
Listen,
I'm gonna my period Cheetos. Yeah, I started eating some Cheetos. I wasn't gonna say nothing, but
I'm not Cheetos. But I'm mad about this one because like, I don't know, the hot fries that I grew up with, they were like lighter and thinner, and these they did seem more like Cheetos, and so I don't know if that's like a brand thing or whatever. But I've been these cravings been killing me lately for junk food, and I've been doing so good.
I had a Ferrero Rocher last night. I had a cinnamon roll this morning, but it's like I was like, you know what? I'm about to start menstruating, and so I'm just gonna chalk it up to that. And I'm just gonna do some extra. I'm gonna run for an hour on the treadmill and do some time on the stair stepper.
I did a HIIT workout this morning and a dance workout, and then I did yoga. So
yeah, I saw. So like Lila has finished the workout. I was like, I'll go after the podcast.
No, my friend Nidra, she always says, she's like, I see you doing all them damn workouts. It's always popping up on my wall. I'm like, you can't block them. You don't have to get the alert.
Right. I don't know if it's your internet or my internet, but it's kind of like
I know
stalling a little bit. Mine was messing up a little bit earlier, so it might be mine. Angela, sugar is a worthy opponent. You ain't never lie. Junk food is the white man's poison. Yeah, listen, you ain't telling me nothing new. Just like social media is the white man's poison, but here we are.
All this shit.
2 F's, babe. Oh wait, did TWOF? Oh, pronounce 2 F's. Oh wait, did I
pronounce 2 F's?
Oh, 2 F's maybe. Pronounce 2 F's. Oh, it's not an acronym.
It took you a minute. It's 2 F's.
2 F's. Okay, so what are because that should have been TWOEFFS, like spelled anyway. Okay, what the 2 F's for? Frankfurter.
No, it's for fuck France is what it's for. No,
Oh, AES. Oh, it's my initials. Okay, cool.
Nas doing the absolute most to make it into something else.
Sometimes a piece of cake just makes your day. I don't like cake that much, but yes, sweets in general, I agree.
My mother's red velvet cake. That was my thing. That was her special occasion thing.
Is red velvet cake chocolate?
Mm-hmm. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be made with cocoa. Anybody give you some bland ass vanilla that they done dyed red is a problem.
That's funny. I thought maybe it was cinnamon or something. I don't know that I've ever had real velvet cake, y'all. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Whipped cream frosting and pecans on the top.
Pecans. I feel like pecans are the old man's nut.
I love pecans. My grandfather growing up had nut trees. He had a little garden. He had a grapevine. And I remember one time we had a family thing, and my cousin Kelsey, I don't know if she had just taken all the nuts that she each had to like her. My cousin, y'all took all my nuts off the bottom of the tree.
My grandma used to send us. So my grandma was one of those gift givers that she would just send you a whole bunch of random shit. Just because she was a very neat hoarder, but she would always in like our gift boxes send like bags of walnuts and pecans. And I'm like, can you send some pistachios, my guy? Like, I need some cashews. Like,
see, people love cashews. I don't like I mean, I don't dislike cashews, they're fine. But to me, cashews are like peanuts. Like pecans are my favorite. And now I do like macadamia nuts, but those are expensive, so I don't get them all the time. But every once in a while. But pecans are actually my favorite nut.
You know, peanuts have the most protein, so I've sort of gained a new respect for them since I be trying to eat like 140 grams of protein. But yeah. Okay, so let us get started because we do have a guest at some point, and we have some comments in the email. But
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So,
all right,
go, Layla.
Okay, I know. You're like, okay. So for check-ins, my semester is officially over. I'm so glad that is the case. Although, like the end of the semester is also annoying because done with classes, but then they're like cramming all this other extra stuff in the semester. So like yesterday was student capstone presentations. I had a bunch of office hours, like all that stuff. But semester's over. The Revolution workshop at University of Tennessee Knoxville went really well. It was really nice. Like I said, I think I mentioned that one of my former cohort members was the convener of this from graduate school. We hadn't really communicated in a while, so it was really nice catching up. But beyond that, excuse me, it was a good experience because I wrote something like completely new for the workshop, and that I got some good feedback on, and I'm gonna keep working on over the summer. But it's good to like be in a place where I feel like I'm doing something. I don't know. I still don't feel like writing is like particularly like my mode, but it's coming along at this point. So this is something that I want to ask you about, Sheree. So I got a response from the journal that I submitted my article to yesterday, back January 31st. And they basically were like, we needed to anonymize it more. And they were like, so like there's a part of the section of the article that's like about me. And I believe that, I understand this is about like the anonymous peer review process, right? Like you want people to be able to read this and not go look you up or whatever. But I'm also just like, I don't really know like how to make a story like that's about me, not about me, when it's tied to like the argument of the story. So like one thing Regine suggested was to like just basically like, can I make up some lies? Like, can I place this somewhere else and then change it back for the actual final publication? And I'm just like, I don't know how that really is gonna like fit. I don't know if it'll make sense together, but I'm just curious about your thoughts about like this process of further and I know you haven't read it, but the process of like further anonymizing for this journal submission. You're muted.
So is the autoethnographic part kind of like entrenched throughout, or is it like one section?
It's in one section because like they specifically named one section of the article.
Take the section out. And then just make a footnote, like put a footnote that there's an autoethnographic session that has been removed for the purposes of anonymizing.
Okay. Okay. We can do that. Yeah, okay. So the other two things, I'm thinking about like goal setting for the summer too. So I feel like, focusing on like working out and all this has been good and productive for this first quarter or third of the year, whatever. So I'm trying to think about ways to do that going into the summer. And so like trying to think about like reading, writing, health challenges, like something that I really, really, I've said this before, but I really do want to do a sprint triathlon before I turn 40 or like for my 40th. And, I'm back into swimming, back into cycling. So running is the thing that I really have to work on. And I've started to a little bit, but I think, didn't we try to do this last year, like a book a week challenge for the summer?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I think I want to try to do that again. But I really want to plan it this time. Like I really want to choose ahead of time the books that I'm gonna like. I don't want to like meander my way through it. I want to be like, these are what I want to read for the summer. Right. So that's also something I'm thinking about.
RW squared. Let's have an RW squared summer. That's always my goal. RW squared is research, writing, reading, working out. So it's 2 R's and 2 W's.
Okay. Yeah. We having to figure it out.
You should try a walk run challenge, like a walk, like an app or something like that to give you structure if running is what you want to work on.
Yeah, I've done it before, but I just have to commit to it. That's what I know what it is about myself. Like, it's all the talk and I just have to commit to it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you could try an article a week. You could try a chapter a week. You could do like little pamphlets. Like you could say like a book that's under 50 pages or 100 pages. So you can tailor it so it works for you.
Yeah. I will say that I feel like a book a week is a lot. But what I know, and I guess this is a personal thing, because when we were in grad school, we were reading 3 books a week. Like
I wasn't. I'm not gonna lie to y'all.
Well,
no reason.
So I also like I know that like without having to like prep for teaching and stuff, like reading a book a week is reasonable for me. I can get through a chapter a day, and most academic books are somewhere between 5 and 7 chapters, whatever. And not that they all have to be academic either. So
and audiobooks count.
Yeah. But my thing about audiobooks, when it comes to like intellectual topics, I can't process it well. So I have to read those. And so then my last thing is that the last chapter that's unwritten for my book is a chapter on the AAPRP. And so and this is a chapter that I'm trying to do on the AAPRP generally. So not just the AAPRP GC. And so I'm planning to do some travel, some archival research. I want to do some interviews and stuff over the summer. And so folks who are in the chat, folks who know people, whether they are older members, whether they're young or new members, if you are interested in talking to me about the AAPRP, whether it be your role as an organizer, activist, or somebody that or if you got some papers that if you have some meeting minutes, meeting minutes, all those kind of things. Like if that's something you're willing to share with me or talk to me about, that's something that I'm trying to really spend the summer working on. And I'm willing to, either do virtual stuff and also hoping, I don't see myself doing a whole lot of international travel right now, just research and other things. So I'm down to move around the country and do these things. So if folks are interested in that, this is just me putting out a call. Feel free to, hit me up on social media, hit us up at, the Life Study Revolution Gmail, or email me, at any of the emails you find online. So that's my update.
Are you going to use like previously recorded oral histories?
I'm thinking about it. Yes. I'm really just trying to think about all of the various sources that I can draw on for this chapter.
Okay, I'll send you some like historians to hit up too that we have some shit. Okay, so Keontae, maybe I don't read a lot of fiction, but if you start with historical fiction, that's probably like a gateway drug, because it's basically history but fictionalized, mind you. Okay, I'm gonna talk about that when I like in the next part of my update. But okay, so recall that 2 weeks ago I said that wish me luck, y'all. I am going to I'm interviewing for a thing. Well, I got the thing. I can't say more, but when I can, I absolutely will. But I'm very thrilled about that. Okay, so this past Sunday I did a book talk about this book, which is called The Black Utopian: Searching for Paradise on the Promised Land in America with Erin Robertson. It was actually pretty cool. Like, I wasn't sure what I was going to think about the book, but once I started reading it, it was really quite interesting. There was a lot that actually dovetailed with my own work, because he was talking about, like, the book is primarily about Shrine of the Black Madonna as a sort of utopic project, but then he talked about other types of utopia. And so his family is from a place called Promised Land that's in, is it Tennessee? That's like this tiny little town. His family still owns land there. It's like, and so that was his first sort of that's why he kind of delved into this idea of utopia. It was a great conversation. It's actually a well-written book, and what's really interesting about it is he interstices prison letters from his dad like into the book. And it's really interdisciplinary. He does some critical geography, there's historical narrative, there's the letters, his own some personal memoir. So it's actually a really interesting book. And yeah, so it was a really good conversation. And especially if you're interested in like the Shrine of the Black Madonna or Black Christian nationalism, or Reverend Albert Clegg Jr., there's a lot of information about him in there. But what I was gonna say, relating back to historical fiction, is like I was talking to one of the librarians there, and some lady asked me if I had read the book Harlem Rhapsody. I had not read it because it's a fiction book, but apparently it is a fictionalized version of Du Bois's, it includes a part about Du Bois's affair with Jessie Fawcett. And I was like, he ain't had no affair with Jessie Fawcett. This must be fiction, because I wrote a biography of Du Bois and I had not heard of this. And so they were like, no, the author got receipts. She writes historical fiction and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, all right, I'll see. Because one thing about me, I'm going to check. So, of course, I hit up Gerald like, you heard about this? And he was like, apparently. And so I was like, what? And so, there's like correspondence and letters. And so I give myself a pass because I write about later Du Bois, like basically 1930 and after. And this was like around his NAACP, his first iteration of NAACP. So around like the 19 teens. I was like, this motherfucker was hoeing, because, he hit like Shirley Graham Du Bois. First, he had a decades-long affair with her. But this was before his affair. Apparently, this was before his affair with Shirley Graham Du Bois. Because and the other reason why I was like, I don't think he did that, because Shirley Graham Du Bois is shady as fuck. And I'm like, if she would have known anything about this affair with Jessie Fawcett, she would have dragged her. And I didn't see anything, but
You're hilarious. You're like, not be missing the archival tea.
I was like, absolutely not. And then I had to, tail tuck between the legs, like, y'all was right, my bad. Whatever. So okay, just two more things before we get to the comments. And Khadijah's actually here. We could bring her on stage and she can help us go through some of these comments. But okay, so the next update is I will be at Cornell University, boo, next week. But I'm only going because to celebrate Dr. Carol Boyce Davies. Obviously, she retired from Cornell and is now at Howard University. While I'm there, of course, I'll be lifting up Mamadou and Amandala, who, of course, are being repressed by the state. All kind of bullshit happening to them. And so I'm gonna just lift them up and make sure to let the administration know that they have not disappeared them, at least in the minds of the people who care about liberation. And then finally, y'all, I am training to be a higher ed coach. I feel like I have mentioned this, but if you are in higher ed, ABD or more advanced, so ABD or an assistant associate professor, a postdoc, or even if you're in sort of alt-ac, so in academia, but not on the tenure track, and you are interested in higher ed coaching around issues of writing productivity, aligning your values with your career path, aligning your politics and your scholarship, periods of transition and other stuff, send me an email. Because I need to as part of my training, I have to get 100 practice coaching hours. So I would love to work with y'all. So if you're interested in doing that, What'd you say, Layla?
I said, how many hours you got so far? Where are you in
I have like 75 hours. Yeah, I have about 75 hours. Yep. And I actually just completed a 12 session package with one of my clients, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, hit me up, y'all. That's it. All right, let's see. Should we bring Khadija on to do the comments with us? She might have something to say about this question about
you get to come on, Khadija.
You ready? All right, figure on. Hey, girl.
Hi.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, there's a little bit of what's it called? You hear that?
It's the echo.
Echo. Mhm.
Oh, I have an echo?
It's when I talk. I think if you talk on a time and talk, you all mute, it should go away. Okay. Yeah, it's gone. So just when each of us is talking, the other mute. So what we're gonna do now is we're just going through the comments, and feel free to chime in on any of these questions. But let me read Khadija's bio since she's here. If you've been living under a rock and don't know who Khadija Haynes is, she's actually our guest. For today, we have a great conversation coming up. But Khadija is the founder of Black People for Theory and Praxis. She's a member of Red Clarion Press, a tenant organizer with Brooklyn Eviction Defense, and an organizer with Medgar Evers College Coalition. She's a writer, poet, MC, and also probably one of your favorite follows on social media. So we're just going to go through the comments real quick, and then we'll hop into our interview. You want to start, Layla?
I can. So this, I think, was an email, not one of the show comments. It says, "Peace, y'all. How important is expressed, clear ideology and theory to Black liberation? I work as a chief of staff for a state rep in North Philly. I have a good friend high up at the Philly School District. I work with Black Lives Matter organizers, have another friend who's a DEI recruiter, met a few folks in law school with political aspirations, a cousin who writes for the Daily News, and even someone on this channel. One thing the aforementioned people have in common is their lack of ideology, while simultaneously having the ability to influence our people. I'm pretty certain you all put a primacy on theory and ideology. What do you all say to those who purport to be liberating our people, but do not prioritize theory to guide their practice?" That's a big question.
Well, so the first question is, do they actually purport to be liberating our people? Like, what is the language they're actually using? Are they talking about leading the people? Are they talking about, working with the people, being an activist on behalf of the people? Because that actually matters. You don't want to map onto them political aspiration that's actually not there. Some people just want to serve a managerial function. Some people want to be leaders, whatever that means. Hey, what up, Fanon? Is that his real name, August Fanon? So that's the first thing, is to really be clear about what their political project is. Secondly, as Fred Hampton said, theory without practice ain't shit. And then, practice without theory. I think it's Cabral that said, basically practice without theory is just motion. And so we actually need to have both. For me, like I always say, the theory is like the practice is the what, the theory is the so what. Why are you doing this? What is your objective? Where are you trying to go? How are you going to go about doing it? And I think that for me, so the example that I give is that there are times when the practices of the left and the right can look the same on the surface. So the right is anti-government, the left is anti-government, right? Anti-US government. But for very different reasons. How they go about it and what they see as a sort of outcome of that is where ideology comes into play. So yeah, I don't know what you all say about that.
I mean, I echo that. I don't know that I have much to add. I mean, obviously that can be a longer conversation, but in terms of like answering that question, it's interesting though to say that all of these people who are doing a particular kind of work, you feel like the common denominator between them is that they lack ideology. And so then the question that I would maybe have for the person who asked the question is that, what does it mean for you that you are attempting to do all this type of work with folks who you feel like have no clear ideological direction? And what type of work are you attempting to do to either push them towards developing one, or what is the contribution that you feel like you're making in working with them? Do you see your role and your responsibility as pushing your own ideology, or do you see yourself as like, I don't know, this is a wrong word for it, but some kind of helpmate in terms of the work that it is that they see themselves doing? And is this a question of like scaling and scaffolding, or is this really like a fundamental issue where it's like, I don't really see the alignment? And so if that is the case, that there's not actually alignment, then to me, it just seems there needs to be a second set of observations that have to happen with yourself about why it is that you are engaging with these various groups of people.
You want to add anything, Khadija?
Yeah, so actually in organizing, I actually run into this a lot with people who just feel like we don't need to read anything. We just, need to pull from our experience, the kind of lived experience trope. And while I don't want to discount that, because I do think, obviously, like, experience is another form of knowledge. If you don't have the historical analysis to kind of undergird your experience, then I feel like you said, Sharice, you're just kind of going to have motion, but you're not going to have any sort of strategy or any sort of tactics. And Lenin talks a lot about this, but just like Emil Cabral talked a lot about this, like in The Weapon of Theory. So, like, I think it's really, really important for people to just take the time to study. You don't have to be like, all day with it, but take the time to kind of understand, because a lot of what we're doing is not novel. A lot of it is paradigmatic. Like, it happened in the past, and we could just pull from those past experiences, and it's a dialectical process. So of course a lot of the old is going to be building from the new, and it's a progress, a progression that builds on something that is have passed. So I think it's important to read, to study.
Now this question math is I really like these questions. I'm not gonna because Layla, what? Oh, were you saying mute? Okay. Because I think that so on the one hand, if it is that the masses don't understand like the terminology of ideology, then number one, as organizers, as servants of people, is our job to explain it to them. And secondly, I think that some of these things people understand intuitively, like that, we have to have a reason for why it is that we're doing what we're doing. We have to have a means of understanding the world. And I think that that's just what ideology is, right? So to your point, Rad, if you're saying like, we need to be, we need to have more clear language with ordinary people, sure. But I also do think as well that sometimes we don't give ordinary people enough credit. And actually, we have a question about this that we'll ask Khadija a little bit later on. So the next comment is, Against the Loveless World is a gem. Glad that was brought up. I'd recommend everyone to read it.
I'm glad. A couple people have have responded to me in different capacities, like either on social media or other places, about enjoying that. So I'm glad. It's not an easy read, y'all. I will say that. Like, it is fiction, but it's about a love story in the midst of like folks fighting underground in Palestine. So like obviously there's going to be death and destruction. So I just want to let people know that like it's a love story, but it's a difficult read. So just be prepared for that.
I'm sorry, what's the name of the book?
It's called here. No, I think it's Against the Loveless World. I'm terrible. Let me see if I can find the author real quick. Susan Abulawa, Abulhawa, Against the Loveless World. It's a novel. Okay.
Do you have headphones? That might help with
that. I do, but they're like the big clunky ones that
no,
my boyfriend is using them, and yeah.
Okay, we'll just
okay. Because it is a bad echo. It's almost like somebody said in the comments, it almost does sound like a second window is open. But anywho, Everyday Shah said, your class at the People's Forum was my favorite, Dr. Layla, sending love from the AAPRP NYC comrades. Thank you. It was really nice to meet y'all. And hopefully y'all will reach out to me, or we will connect about the work that we're doing, that I'm trying to do this summer. So
yeah. All right. Thank you both for your LSR. It's honestly so embarrassing to be a mature woman who didn't really understand Pan-Africanism until Dr. Layla Brown's class in the TPF course. Our freedom can't wait. Don't be embarrassed. That is what political education is for.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I think this is something I say to people all the time. you're not responsible for what you don't know. You're responsible for what you refuse to learn. And so, like, if you haven't been exposed to things in the past, that's not like you don't have any control over that. But at the point at which you become exposed to something and you choose to or not to pursue it, that's the point at which, you know, embarrassment, shame, whatever else can enter into the you know, into the ether, into the chat, whatever. But we don't have any control over what we don't know up until the point that we know it. So I just, you know, I always just discourage that as a way of framing not knowing things. Free New Africa said, okay, so this is so this is in response. It's like a series of comments that are in response to, I think, some of the things that we were talking about when we were talking about Dean Spade's books. Scarcity and dating. Black women do have a dearth of Black men. In the US, every other group has almost a 1-to-1 availability rate. Black women have like a 1 to like 0.75 ratio for available Black men. I'm just going to put them all together. Source is from 1.5 missing Black men, New York Times. Anecdotally, we all know so many sisters with no kids and no prospects that there's not many Black men with no kids and no prospects. It seems like the only group that gets to enjoy the trinkets of capitalism are middle-class Black women who tend to be unwed with no kids. They want to be wed with kids, but they are stuck on liberal feminism, which sees the Black male experience as privilege, but can't explain the dearth in our population. Those numbers don't even include Black men who are chronically unemployed and ineligible in the eyes of most. Petty bouge boomers be living their best lives too. Can liberal feminism / mainstream feminism, which so many Black women are wed to, explain this dearth of Black men? I don't know that it explains the dearth of Black men. There, like, obviously there are structural issues that are creating the dearth of Black men, whether it be, you know, the sheer numbers that Black women are attending college and at a different rate, that Black women are employed in particular kinds of fields of work at different rates. We also, like, the other thing about life is that after school, like after like K through 12, we're in fairly like homogeneous bubbles, like with the exception of like church. Well, like where are the places that we go? We go, you know, we go to some kind of religious house for whatever. We go to work, you know, maybe those are like, you know, I think we get a little bit of extra as folks who are either organized or academics. We have these other kinds of spaces where we encounter folks, but most people are going to work and going home every day. And so if you're not in environments where people are doing, like, there's, you know, there's an offering of Black folks as Black men, as Black women. If you're interested in heterosexual pairings, then just like the structure of our daily lives doesn't even allow us to really cross one another's paths. Like I tell people this all the time, like my daily life consists, like as a professor, mostly consists of other Black women, not folks that are not of color, and the few heterosexual Black men who I do encounter are typically already partnered. As I encounter them. So, you know, I don't even know, like, the question, does Black feminism, or can liberal feminism or mainstream feminism, which so many Black women are wed to, explain the dearth of Black men? I don't know that that's the objective. There's so many other structural things that explain that dearth.
I think it's more capitalism than feminism. I think it's capitalism and Schadenfreude, because part of what Schadenfreude, like, you know, what I mean by that is, part of what you explained is class bias. I refuse to use the fucking term classism. It's not a thing. But basically what you're describing is like Black women who don't want to date Black men who are of a lower socioeconomic status, or sometimes a lower educational status, or who doesn't have quote unquote prospects. That's the issue of capitalism. That permeates, that traverses like ideology, firstly. Secondly, I don't know if working through a heteronormative or heteronationalist framework is the best way to think through, and also a national framework. Because, like, you know, if we look internationally, now again, that might have its own sort of class biases, because who can actually travel internationally? What do those couplings actually look like? But I would blame it more on capitalism and the ethics of capitalism, like this idea of scarcity, competition, not wanting like hypo descent, in the sense of if you date somebody or marry somebody that is of a lower socioeconomic status, that somehow lowers your own status. I think those things are probably more salient.
You want to go to the next one, the next set of comments?
Yeah, I don't know if Khadija wanted to add. No, I'm not saying we're looking for a man to fund our lives. I feel like you always, Deshay, you always leap to like the worst possible interpretation of what I'm saying. Like, this is not the first time you've done it. What I am saying is, and people will agree, that there is a particular class basis to the way that dating is. I've talked about this as financial eugenics elsewhere, but like, this is not something I've made up in my head. Like, there is a way that Black women tout their level of education or their class position, and then that determines who they do or do not want to date. The internet is saturated with this. If you even get engaged in interpersonal conversations, so let's just miss me, please. All right, next question. Do you all think a fight for national liberation is inherently revolutionary?
I would just say no. Not initially. It doesn't have to be. I mean, we can see all throughout history. Like even if we're just talking about like Haiti, with their revolution, 1804. I mean, it wasn't initially like super like ground up revolution, but it was like a certain kind of bourgeois mulatto class that had access to stuff and had the education that kind of led the revolution. That's usually how it works. And then it takes on a more revolutionary character as it goes on, but it doesn't necessarily start that way.
Which would mean, like you said, the answer to the question, inherently no. There's always the potential, but there's potential to go in other directions too.
Although, according to Harry Haywood, the national liberation struggle of Black people is objectively revolutionary because of the content of that struggle. That that because of the national character of Black oppression, that is to say, it's not just discrimination, it's not just exclusion. Like, it is national in character, akin to the ways that other nations are oppressed. That because of the racialized capitalist nature of this country, part of what the Communist Party, that's who he's talking to, needs to contend with is the fact that even if it is sort of led initially by the Black bourgeoisie, because it is challenging the very structures of Black super exploitation, it is revolutionary in character. And if we notice sort of like anti-colonial struggles, they're revolutionary up until a particular point. When they're out throwing out the white folks, yes, because the internal class contradictions are subsumed to the primary contradiction, which is colonialism or imperialism. But after the sort of white man is gone, that is when we see the rise of neocolonialism, et cetera. And so I think, so I'm not exactly certain if it's a no per se. There are theories that say that they are like
No, that was really good, and I think that it can take on different forms. I think that Domenico Lacerdo, which is a philosopher, also he talks about this in the text he has called Class Struggle, where maybe the women's struggle may take precedent over the national liberation struggle, or maybe the national liberation. So it just like switches forms, and yeah, so it could go either way.
All right, and then just we're wrapping up the last two. So we had a series of hearts from Answer Landlord, and then Amy Marquez said, "You can tell the character of a man by the books in his mental library."
I just can't argue with that as somebody who reads, and I've met people who have not read a book since the 7th grade. I think that can be fair. Okay, so we are now going to hop into our conversation with Khadija. That is about we're going to get into what it's about first. So.
Okay, so I know you've been like doing the rounds. The article that you published in Hood Communist, a fetus on the dirt road against Imperial Feminisms, claims of mass rape and exploring the theory of sepulcherality. You've had a few conversations. You had a conversation on millennials are killing capitalism. And so part of our preparation for today, we read we read that article and some other things, but I wanted to ask a kind of general question to start us off. So as a jumping off point, you use the story of the Turner family, Hayes and Mary, as a way to make connections between anti-Black and anti-Palestinian state violence, and to explicitly reject some of the Zionist attempts to co-opt the narratives of Black and Palestinian suffering to rally support for the general genocidal tendencies of the Zionist entity. I was really struck because I remember as a kid, my parents taking us to the Black Wax Museum in Baltimore and seeing the exhibit of Mary Turner. And it's funny because like I remember it very distinctly, but when I started reading your piece, I immediately the vision had come back to me, because I don't think I've really like engaged with that much since then, but it immediately came back to me when I started reading your piece. And so I was wondering if you could talk about yourself as a writer and a poet in general, and how you think about the importance of storytelling, because like this, you use the story as a point of entry, but it's not really the focal point of the article, right? But it is to kind of talk about a particular like virulent strain of violence that is like dehumanizing in so many ways. And you really like go through like in-depth detail in terms of describing what the experience was of Hayes Turner and Mary Turner and their baby being brutally beaten. And then you draw some parallels between what's happening in Palestine. So I just wanted to hear you talk maybe about how you come to choose like stories that you write, and how it is that you try to make these connections through these types of stories.
Yeah. Do I sound okay now? Oh, okay. Because I had my heater going. I was cold. Maybe that's what it was. So, yeah, I use, or rather, I try to tell the story of Mary Turner, and I situate that to kind of like unfold the kind of unmatched, very kind of specific, tyrannical, sadistic violence in the US with Western imperialism. A lot of people, it's crazy. It's funny to me that you said that you heard about the story when you were young. I didn't hear about the story until I think I was like 27, 26. Um, and I remember I was on my way to work, and I stopped and I was like, what happened? Like, I was just like, yeah, I just couldn't believe what I was reading. And yeah, it just like it to this day, like I just can't imagine like the brutality. So I kind of employ the what happened to the Turners to kind of unfold the horrific rape of Palestinian women in Palestine, Palestinian children, Palestinian men, and the kind of horrific rape that people just dismiss with Black men and boys. Specifically, I talk about the young Black male child, George Steiny, who was the first person to be electrocuted in this country. And yeah, it's a specific kind of violence that just subsumes you, and it's very embedded, I think, not only in the white psyche, but just like the way that we think, unless you kind of orient yourself towards a more Marxist or Pan-Africanist sort of thinking, and you try to like really interrogate those things. I noticed like the violence just sort of like subsumes us in a way. So I wanted to talk about that and tell that story.
It's interesting. This is a different question, but it's related to this.
Can you mute the echo?
Yeah. So this, and I don't know if I don't know a lot about your personal stories. I don't know if you have children or not, but I'm curious about this thought, right? Because you said it's interesting that I learned about it as a child, and I remember I was in middle school, and literally the Black Wax Museum in Baltimore had a recreation of Mary Turner's body, and like in wax. And like they also had like, like a slave ship kind of thing. And I remember being like debates over between my parents over like, how much do you expose your kids to this stuff and at what age and what kind of work does it do? And I feel like it's also connected to this present conversation that we've been having kind of in the era of Black Lives Matter, which is about like, do we continue to do all this work to like document, whether that be like video recording? Is it pornographic for us to retell or rewatch these kinds of details? And I mean, it's like the links that you went through to like retell what the story is. I feel like I have a sense of maybe what you might say, but I'm curious just about your thoughts about either like the photographic depictions of the particular kinds of violences that we experience as Black people, as African people, as Palestinian people, as colonized people, and like if that is something that, like, do you subscribe to this narrative that this process of like over consuming Black death, right, violence against Black life, sort of what do you call it, numbs us to these types of pain, or is it actually necessary for us to continue to witness this type of violence, to tell these types of stories?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. I've been writing for a long time, since I was a kid, and I do have a daughter. I have my daughter when I was in my last year of high school. She's actually going to be 20 years old. And I just like lived a rough life, and I just kind of, this sort of, I don't know, like I remember when I was in like sixth grade, I wrote a story about a girl being raped by her father, and my English teacher was like, "Is this happening to you?" And I was like, "No, this is not happening to me." And it was like a whole thing. They wanted my mother to take me to the doctor. I just always have been like, really, I think because I can't draw very well, I have to be able to paint what I'm gonna say with words. And I need to be as detailed as I possibly can. And yeah, like I feel in a way that the Zionist ethno state was trying to co-opt that story for their own genocidal purposes. I feel like I mean, the correlation between the story that they tell and what happened to Mary Turner, I mean, it's like word for word. So I remember hearing this. I was like, no, this is our story. This is our narrative. This is what happened to us. Like, you don't get to just like make up some shit because you feel like you're trying to garner sympathy for your genocidal project. Um, yeah, so I tell my daughter like what time it is. Like I tell her, sometimes she don't want to listen to me, sometimes she does. But I mean, I make sure I let her know like, it's some real shit out here. Like you can't like it's not a game. And you always have to be vigilant, I'd say. And I just like to your point about like the wax museum, like my parents, I guess, they weren't, my father like was educated, but they weren't like super learned. And they always kind of like fostered in me like creative thing. Like they always really like kind of like that. So I would be exposed to things, but I don't know how to explain it. Like, but still in the homogenous bubble in a sort of a way. I don't know if that even makes sense, but like because I guess like even when we talk about feminism, I didn't really been exposed to feminist ideology, to be honest with you. Like I'm from Flatbush, it's like the women, that I grew up with, we don't really sit around and talk about Patricia Hill Collins. It's just not a thing. Like so I started to like read it like, when I was at York, I went to York College in Queens, it's a CUNY, and I was like, oh, like just I started to read a little bit in high school. Um, and then I kind of dropped away from it because it just never really resonated with me. Because what I saw around me was people just working together. not really like talking about like, oh, I'm gonna focus on women only and that's just what we're gonna do. So I guess, maybe my limited experience with things or something is like kind of what shaped me this way.
It's an interesting contradiction because on the one hand, um I think we sometimes rely too much on the spectacular violence in ways that overlook the quotidian ways that like genocide, for example, happens. And so for with what's happening in Gaza right now, we rarely heard it referred to genocide until it reached the level of annihilation. But genocide is not annihilation. What has been happening since 1948 is genocide, right? It's the attempt to erase a people in whole or in part, which includes attacks on culture, historical memory, land, all of these types of things. And so sometimes I think that on the one hand, we do need to lift up the violence of empire, which includes things that are like unimaginable, right? But on the other hand, if only the unimaginable is galvanizing, then it becomes problematic because there's so much like our threshold for the oppression is raised because it's not a lynching, right? It's just somebody getting kicked in their back in Haiti by US Marines in 1915 to get off the street, right? Which is like, oh, that's rude, but we don't understand that to be a form of genocide, right? And so yeah, so I feel like I'm ambivalent about it. Um we did not explain sepulcherality yet to here. We're getting there. All right. So next question is, so okay, in your interview on millennials are killing capitalism, you were talking about, this essay and related topics. And because I want our audience to read and listen to that work, I don't necessarily want you to rehearse all of the arguments here, but I just have a few questions. One is like, can you talk about why you wrote that essay? And secondly, like, what are some of the key takeaways? Like, what are some things you really want people to walk away with? And then what are some of your favorite insights from the Millennials Are Killing Capitalism interview? It was a really wide-ranging conversation. And then maybe say a few words about why Black male studies has been a powerful intellectual tool for you. And then finally, like, what's a question you wish you had been asked on that podcast that you haven't really been asked, or like sort of something you want to build upon from that conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start with why I wrote the essay. I wrote the essay actually when I was in the party. I wrote the essay. I just wrote it. Just wanted to bring an article forward, and then we had something called we had the big convention last year, and we had discussion pieces, and that was one of the discussion pieces, not in the form that it is now, but I split it up. One section got rejected, but the the narrative about Mary Turner did not get rejected, and so I wrote it primarily because, like I said, I when I heard the story, I really felt like, okay, they are trying deliberately to hijack what happened to Black women and pretend like this is happening to Israeli women. And like you said, Sharice, as far as like the quotidianness of like that is a kind of genocidal um, way, but in a kind of literary genocide, because you're taking away our narratives, our histories. It doesn't look like much. Maybe people don't even know that it happened, but it's a hijacking. It's a hijacking. And so that is a sort of a slow sort of genocidal march towards something more spectacular, right? Um, and yeah, so I wrote it initially for the party. Um, Nobody really said anything about it. And then I ended up leaving the party, and then I started to work on it a little bit more. I sent it to a good friend of mine in the party. Shout out to Brooklyn. She read it. She liked it. She identifies more as a feminist, so there was some points that she took issue with, but she's balanced, and she was fucking with it. And my homeboy, Jacob, he also read it, and he was also fucking with this. So I just started like, I wanted to really write something because I felt like I do this thing where I write and then I'll just leave it right there. But I was like, I felt like pregnant with something I had to say. Like I was full of something. And I just, when I finished and it was like 18 pages, I was like, okay, I want to get this out some way, somehow. I sent it to Hood Communist. I didn't know if they was gonna publish it. I had published something on MLK like the year before, but I was just like, I just have to really like get this out. I'm sorry if you could repeat the other questions.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah, it was a
lot.
lot.
Okay, so the next one is like what are some of the key takeaways, right, from that you or what are some of the key ideas you would like people to walk away with from the essay?
So yeah, so the theory of sepulcherality, it kind of pulls from Jasper Prier. I don't know if they identify as she, they. Just gonna use they. Has a text called "Terrorist Assemblages," um, kind of talking about like what happened, this kind of maiming of Palestinian people, not a killing but a maiming, and I pull from that, and I just was also kind of pulling from Agamben's theory of like bare life, just like different pieces. A bit of Sylvia Winter is in there as well, and I just felt like it's sort of like an interstice between death and dying, like not quite dead but not alive, and kind of like in a limbo kind of space where your sense of self has been so degraded, so butchered, that you're alive but you're not able to breathe. In a sense, you're not able to really like feel anything because you've just been so pummeled with the quotidian genocide and the outright genocide that there's nothing left. And I wanted to speak to this. I also like wanted to speak to this and talking about like black male death as well, and that sort of cannibalization that happens that people just kind of gloss over. So those are the kind of things that I was pulling from, and I really want people to kind of go there with me, like when they read the essay. And another thing that I want people to kind of pull away from, I have a section where I talk about like sisterhood, and I kind of talk about like, I remember saying something about like a sort of genocidal rupture, because I remember for so long I was actually searching for some sort of like, sisterhood, and I would join all these like groups of like feminist, classes and like whatever, just trying to like find something. And I did connect with people, even though we have different views. But I just always felt like because I didn't wholesale agree, I was automatically like delegitimized. And because also, I guess I didn't know like all the different queer theories. I just didn't have the same experience in terms of like the college experience of learning all these different things. I think people kind of look down on me and kind of was like, well, you're not equipped to really be in the space, I guess. And it just kind of really kind of made me feel really atomized and really isolated. Yeah.
So the next question, these two together was, can you discuss some of your favorite insights from the interview? Because it was a little bit different than the article itself, and then say a few words about why Black male studies has been a powerful intellectual tool for you, because you did talk quite a bit about Black male studies on the interview.
I think one of my like memorable moments is when Josh actually talked about how he identified more with Black feminism initially, but started to notice like as a queer Black man that something about this ideology was just it wasn't addressing the sort of ruptures that patriarchal society, capitalistic patriarchal society, also does to Black people, Black men, Black women, Black children. Like it didn't address that. It was just so like focused on this one specific group, And he told me that he started little by little to kind of like move away from this. And that was really like a pivotal point. I think another point, I think I was talking about like just my upbringing. Again, like I'm from Trinidad originally, and you know, Trinidadian background. And yeah, I'm from Brooklyn, and you know, my experience, I think I remember telling him like I'm had a really bad like landlord experience that kind of caused me to almost die actually from carbon monoxide poisoning about like 3 to 4 years ago. And I think I remember just explaining to him that, you know, these experiences, like just growing up in Brooklyn, I'm just like a regular homegirl, but really struggling to kind of understand like frameworks and reading like while I was just like doing, you know, cash register at the job, and people would come in and like, you know, I need help, and I would just try everything that I every little free time that I had at work, I would try to read and try to understand, even though it was difficult to like work through, you know, capital like all by myself. I would really push myself to understand. So those are some of the memorable moments from the talk. Yeah.
Sorry, I roll my eyes. Ricky talk about a Trini from Brooklyn with a credible analysis. Yes, we exist. Just had to insert yourself, huh? I mean, it's true, but okay. And so the last question was like, what do you wish you had been asked, or like, what do you wish you would be asked about like your writing this article, or some details you would add since giving that interview?
I think I wish I would have been asked more about like I don't really talk much about like my personal life, and I kind of wanted to speak to this too because there's been like a kind of horde of like harassment against me online for some past comments, and I kind of wanted to speak to like class and, you know, my upbringing, and you know, like I guess not being exposed to certain things. And I guess, you know, I come from more of like a Pan Africanist, like maybe like a little Hotep kind of. Um, you know, I'm a little Hotep. I mean, I don't know what to say.
Hey, that's like this music part, like
I'm a little Hotep, so I had a deep, serious Hotep phase. And, you know, like, listen to a lot of Khalil Muhammad and Shahrazad Ali, and you know, I still like Shahrazad Ali. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's problems, but
you want to put a porno now?
no, I do not want that. No, if you try to step at me, I mean, we have to go toe to toe. I mean, but there was just I just kind of like liked the way that she talked about things. Like I'm a big Sister Soldier fan. Like I read all the fucking hood novels and shit. Like so like I just like, you know, I just kind of held on to these views, although I was trying to like break out of them, and you know, being introduced more and more to Marxist texts and just wanted to learn. I don't think when people are so hemmed in to sort of critique people, they always forget about like a person's class background. And I think that if we want to like help people to elevate in their consciousness, you have to kind of like give space and understand, which is a dialectical materialist analysis, to kind of understand like what kind of social environment a person was raised in, and how they move through that space to build the kind of person that they are and the way that they think. That is a kind of dialectical materialist analysis, which is like so absent, of course, from like online discourse because it's not made for that sort of a thing. But yeah, that's that. I just wish that like, because I don't talk so much about my personal life, but my personal life and my upbringing, and I worked so many years in that wig store. It was really, really hard. I actually have a piece that I'm working on about like, I don't know, maybe like auto theory kind of a thing, where I'm gonna be talking about my experiences having a daughter. Like I'm only like 18 years older than my daughter, like, you know what I mean? And you know, her grandmother was the one that raised her. And I didn't. And I actually didn't even find out I was pregnant until like 7 months. And then the doctor was like, oh, because I was chubby. I was chubby in high school. And then I think I was just like, I don't even know. I think I was just in denial or some shit. I don't know. And then the doctor was like, oh, you're 7 months pregnant. And I was just like, I was just like, well, what am I gonna do? Like, he was like, there's nothing you can do. You just have to have this baby. And she's beautiful. She's amazing person. Yeah, and all of these things kind of shape my life. Yeah.
I was just thinking, I was feeling fucking horrible when I was pregnant. I threw up. Layla could tell you when we was in Europe, I was throwing up and shit. Like, I was feeling fucking terrible. I knew immediately. I was like, oh no, it's something foreign in here.
I was pregnant for a good 4 weeks of my entire life. And in those 4 weeks, I lost 20 pounds because I could not eat anything. So I knew the second. I was like, the second. But that's neither here nor there. This is also not related to anything. But to hear, did we meet at AIHS in Michigan, or did you like a PhD? I feel like your face looks familiar, like a state of the field of Black studies. Just
I've never been to Michigan, but
oh no,
oh, okay.
I keep zooming in.
Well, no, it's because when you put his comment up on the screen, the face was bigger. But so this is not my question, but it is something in response to Khadija's comment. So it's when you were talking about feeling like isolated and I guess organizing circles because of not having like being well versed in particular readings or whatever. That's really interesting because like that is absolutely an experience I had in graduate school. Like I went straight to graduate school from undergrad. I studied a field in graduate school that I did not like. I was studying history and Spanish in undergrad, and then I went to study anthropology. I didn't really read no theory in no undergrad, and a lot of even what like my own understanding of myself as a Pan-Africanist really came from how I was raised and things that I learned through stories my parents told me, things that were around me, but not necessarily like texts that I was reading. But what's interesting in a different way that I experienced when I started going into organizing spaces is that I was organizing with a lot, and maybe it's because it was young people, maybe it's because it was young Black, Latino folks, I don't know, but there was a lot of struggle, I think, for us to like say, okay, we actually do need to read together. Because the story that my parents always told me was that work study was critical to what they did, as members of the party. And so like my dad was a laborer. He was an electrician working, and he was like staying up late at other times to read these things to then be ready for the work study conversations. And so like I feel like there is this thing that happens both in I think in organizing spaces that are over determined by like people who have academic orientations, to like say, okay, you're already supposed to know these things, but so much of our responsibility in these organizing spaces is to norm set, is to like build our shared understandings of ideology. And we do that through reading things together. And so that just feels very, like not at all that I'm contesting what your experience was, but like that just feels like the crux of so many issues of like, why is it that when we say that we want to commit to a particular thing and we don't necessarily know where we want to start, that folks in those spaces don't take that as earnestly at face value and think about the work that we're supposed to do organizationally, structurally, to have our people be on the same page, rather than thinking that like, oh, you're just supposed to come in ready-made, already knowing these things. And that does feel like a really serious barrier to being able to like participate in political life in a particular kind of way. Now, the question that I do have is related to the article. So throughout the article, you critique, like you call it different things, right? So you talk about Imperial Feminisms, Western, settler, Hitlerite, and even Black feminisms is in that, in that configuration as complicit and even foundational to liberalism and capitalist exploitation, which I don't disagree with. But you also say that it is, quote, it is an imperial feminism that violently imprisons actual feminist intellectuals, as in the case of Professor Nadira Sahub Kevorkian, who was thrown into jail by Israelis for incitement and stripped naked. So what I want to ask is, like, this quote implies that there's something worthy of redemption in an actual feminism. And so I wanted to, so this is something like, this is an ongoing conversation that we've been having. I too am a person that identifies with feminism. I don't know, it's not that it's necessarily Black feminism. I'm working to like flesh out my own understanding of a Pan-African feminism, a third world feminism, whatever. But I want to hear like you talk more about what maybe what you think an actual feminism is, and if you think there is like something either redemptive in feminism, or is there like a purchase in having, because I guess like triple oppression, triple exploitation, I think are what would you call it? They are like they're lenses of analyses, right? But I think that there is something different about the term feminism, which can be a critical lens of analysis, but I think it's also like there's more purchase there in being able to say that I am this thing, right? And so I wonder what you think about the like one, what you think actual feminism is, and if you think it's worth it to be able to have something that we actually can name ourselves as opposed to like an analytic or a lens.
Yeah, so if you would have asked me this question like a year ago, I think I would have answered like, yeah, I think that there's something redemptive, and I don't think that we should completely part with it. I had a personal experience recently, maybe I'll share like somewhere down the line somewhere. But this experience kind of made me say, okay, like these women are not living what they write or what they say. And it just kind of, I don't know, it just kind of blindsided me a little bit, but I still have a soft spot, because I still like read Sister Outsider. I think it's a great text, like hanging on to every word of Audre Lorde. But I will say that there's so many women who just fight for their communities, fight for other women, and they have never kind of like needed this qualifier in front of them. There's a long Marxist history, there's a long Pan Africanist history. Like, I mean, I really like the work of Clenora Hudson Weems. I know that I mean, I don't see anybody talk about Clenora Hudson. I've never seen anybody talk about Clenora Hudson. It's like, do people even know that she's exist? Like, there's another woman called I think Um, I'm forgetting her
Ah,
name.
Dove.
Dove. Also in the same vein. So I think I kind of tend towards an Africana feminism, but I also have like a Claudia Jones triple oppression sort of lens. So maybe it's both, but um, maybe like I'm just unmodified. Like I haven't really decided. And I also think like I was listening to I don't want to like I always forget how to like say her name, or Wuki or Yumi.
Oh yeah,
Oh
oh
yeah,
yeah.
oh yeah.
Oyewumi.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to her and reading her work recently, and somebody asked her like, "Is she a decolonial feminist?" And she completely rejected the term. She was just like, it still kind of hems us into a sort of imperialist, white supremacist kind of construct where it's like you need to like measure yourself against this white construction. And so for me, and this is where Curry's work is important for me, because a lot of like even like the most, even like Audre Lorde, um she'll have like an astute analysis of race and class, and understand like the immense pitfalls of mainstream feminism, but still hold on to the tropes, the misandric kind of tropes about black men, as violent, as hating all lesbians, as she even wrote about her son and how she's gonna have to come to terms that he's gonna be a man one day. Like, I just think that there's something troubling about the term and the framework feminism, because of its sort of ethnological, criminological roots, from the 19th century, from the suffragette movement. And I know a lot of people would say, well, we have Anna Julia Cooper, and we have, but they didn't even call themselves feminists. And I'm actually going to write about this as well, like this sort of hijacking of our ancestral women into a feminist category when they didn't even utilize the term themselves, and the term just appeared in the 20th century, so it wasn't even a thing. And so for me, this is really important when I talk about like Black male studies. I really don't see an antagonism, because I feel like when we talk about patriarchy, when we talk about patriarchy is a mode within capital, it is an economic structure, it is an economic power, social structure that Black men historically have also been locked out of, just as Black women. And we didn't have any of these like gender categories when we came on those ships. Those were imposed upon us. So it's like, even when we talk about feminism and we talk about like Black women's, whatever, we're still kind of like confining ourselves within a white supremacist logic, because we're using their terms, their frameworks, and their logics to kind of define ourselves. And I think, for me, I just think that we need to break out of that. How that's going to look, I'm still trying to work through it. But for me, I need a framework that centers, let's talk about the rape of the Palestinian man who had the phone inserted inside of his body. That is rape. When we talk about Black men being raped by white women, these things don't get talked about. When there was a kind of lecture that Curry gave where he talked about a white woman describing the sort of sexual arousal that she was seeing and feeling from a Black man being lynched. And he kind of juxtaposed that with James Baldwin's essay, I think, on Men at Work or something like that. This is really troubling. And this sort of logic is still repeated within the most progressive, intersectional, decolonial framework. They still kind of parrot the same, poisonous sort of axioms that come from the mainstream white feminists. So that right there, that sort of crux, is problematic for me. And that's why I think Black male studies is important.
I think
I was
going to ask more about that.
Yeah. So another person is Valethia Watkins. Valethia Watkins, you would absolutely love. And like, I teach her work when I teach about sort of critiques of feminism and the conflation of feminism and Black women's studies. I teach Valethia Watkins. She, as far as I know, she hasn't published very much, but her writing is in the African American Studies Reader. That's where I got it. And then she has some really good talks on YouTube. So she's another one. I actually wrote in my honors senior thesis about Africana women.
I love her.
Yeah. So I think part of, feminism is, I think that, so Erica mentioned like sort of the way that global South women identify with feminism and how it's just a completely different like locus of enunciation. That is to say, it's a completely different material reality. And I always said, like, if I was in like Jamaica or in the Caribbean, I would probably be a feminist too. It's different sort of, just a different reality. But I will say, like, to me, there's a particular the way that women's liberation, like as one enunciation of feminism, comes about in like the 1960s and 70s makes sense as a political project that then, and as a sort of epistemology, because of the ways that some liberatory struggles were being articulated at that moment through the reclamation of manhood. Now, the problem is that we extrapolate into the past with a very particular historical moment and framework that is very much ensconced with the Moynihan Report, right? And so I can understand why it is that there's a particular consciousness about gender that comes about at that moment, that, again, that gets sort of extrapolated into the present as well. There are experiences that women were having and non-men were having at a particular historical moment that we don't necessarily interrogate now. We just assume that they're trans-historical. and this is not like, so we read the past through that lens and we read the future through that lens, right? And so to me, that is what needs to be like taken into account. And I think that for me as well, part of the reason why I was attracted to like women revolutionary Black nationalists, but feminism didn't stick, is because for me, the way that I grew up, I feel like the violence and a lot like interpersonal things that I experienced were at the hands of women and men. And I didn't find feminism as a usable framework for interrogating the um, female homosocial violence that I was experiencing as much as men. And so I'm not going to go so far as to say that women were more violent, but it's like I grew up in an all-female household. I was a cheerleader. I was in a sorority. And just, women can be incredibly, there's a particular violence, right, that is ensconced in systems, but that also has its own logic that to me there wasn't a self-critical. Feminism is not, I don't find Black feminism to be self-critical, to be honest with you, or to account for those forms of violence. And so it just didn't resonate with me. I needed a broader framework. But I also am sympathetic to why it is that women of a particular historical moment formed organizations or had a particular framework, right? And that's not to excuse, as you talk about, like the ethnological basis of the theory and the sort of positioning of the theory as the apotheosis of liberatory struggle, because it's not that. And so it's just trying to hold those things, right? Like I don't excuse like the sort of Gloria Steinemism and her CIA stuff, but people can also make particular critiques of Marxist-Leninism parties that also got infiltrated, all these types of things, right? And so I try to hold
It's
those
the same
things.
issue with Pan-Africanism. We have the pimps of Pan-Africanism who don't actually fully embody what some of us understand it to be. There's also too, like there was a comment that you made about gender being a particular construct, and I'm familiar with Oyewumi's arguments about this, and part of like there's also like a twofold argument to some of her articulations of this, right? Because she's both attempting to understand like kind of pre-colonial African society outside of like romanticism, and she is trying to do a particular like epistemological project of understanding, okay, if it is that we want to understand how gender operates, then we can't assume that gender is the same thing everywhere at all times, and so we have to understand like what is the particular historical context. But the argument that you made about like gender being a particular construct that comes into being through these colonial experiences, that's also true of Blackness or Africanness. But we don't throw it away. Like we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in that regard, because our seeing ourselves as Black or African people is something that comes into being through this moment of contact where we're defined vis-a-vis an other. And so I wonder, like, what does it mean that we say like gender doesn't have that purchase because it comes into being in this particular moment, but yet we hold on to Blackness or Africanness in a particular kind of way, even though it has those same kind of relativistic origins.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say that there's a kind of like a stark difference, because when we talk about Africanness, Africanity, like you can pull from the sort of like essence of like struggle and liberation and pain and just a sort of really like liberatory kind of essence, where I feel like when we talk about feminism and its roots, there's something that if we when we go back, there's so much darkness, and it's such a burden that comes carried along with that you don't have when we talk about Africanness in the same way. And yeah, so I would just see it like that. I do appreciate that analysis. And there was something that you said also, Sharice, about like, yeah, so the particular moment in the 60s, like I completely agree. I feel like that had to happen at that particular time, because there were just so much like the social milieu was just, it was just like a cauldron of things happening at the moment, where it just kind of birthed this sort of Archimedean point of like gendered liberatory struggle. It's much different. What happened is that I feel like it became so deformed and just so went in so many sort of antithetical and strange directions, that it just sort of kind of lost that initial thrust and fullness to it. So yeah, but I do appreciate what you were saying. Like to the point of Valthea's work, though, I really think that it's important for us to like read women like that because she really goes into the sort of capture of women, like all kinds of women, like you just subsume under this one category. And but she also talks about like, bell hooks and her critiques also, and she also said some things about like white feminism. But I also feel like when there is a critique from a kind of decolonial sort of a crowd, it's like they'll say some things, but then they'll pull it back and just say, okay, yes, this is wrong, but at the end of the day, we are all feminists, and this is important, and men, black men are like killing and raping everybody, and it's just like you always just that is just the argument. And for me, it's like even when you talk about like global South feminism and things like that. I don't know. Like I think like if I was like back in Trinidad, I don't know if I would be a feminist. I'm not quite sure. Because what I would say is, and I think Myron J. Gilmore, he's a professor. He does some work on like counterinsurgency and stuff. He has an essay where he talks about like women in the global South who do have like a lot of feminist histories and things like this. But it's like also like it was in a certain way like kind of used as like a soft power to kind of like separate the women from like the insurgent men. So you still kind of have that kind of that tension and that problem, but it's not kind of exposed in the same way as it is here in the West. So yeah.
So the other thing, so there was something about that I wanted to say earlier about Carol Boyce Davies, when she writes about Claudia Jones, she talks about radical Black female subjectivity, and that resonates with me more than like a Black feminist. So whereas Eric McDuffie talks about like Black left feminism, which is not something that's endogenous to, it's not how they talked about themselves. So like I think Carol Boyce Davies is careful to talk about radical Black female subjectivity because she acknowledges that Claudia Jones like didn't identify as a feminist, but is doing this type of work. And so to me, so yeah. Anyway, so let me get on to the question. Okay.
I really like radical Black subjectivity too. I think it's great. And I think you did also have an essay that you wrote about Claudia Jones, and I think just about, I forget what it's called, but you did write something about like Claudia Jones and her relationship with like women, and her being deported to like England and the different interlocutors that kind of like, yeah, so that does resonate a lot more with me than Black feminism.
Mm-hmm. So to this question that we've just been talking about, it's sort of like, so a comrade mentioned they listened and took notes on your millennials are killing capitalism interview, and they wanted me to ask about the sharp distinction you drew between patriarchy and misogyny. And so she wondered if you can define what you mean by those terms and discuss the relationship between them. And just to this, I would add terms like sexism or androcentrism. These are things that I discuss when I teach about gender alongside patriarchy, misogyny, and misandry. Because to me, like, and I've talked about this online too, it's like they're often conflated, right? And so to say that there's not Black patriarchy as such is not to say that there's not misogyny or sexism, for example, right? And so I just wonder if you could both define and then talk about the relationships between these, and then if you see like sexism, misogyny, androcentrism applying to the Black community in ways that patriarchy might not.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a problem of misogyny and sexism in our communities. There's, I feel like it's something that we need to address. It's something that I address like in my organizing spaces. It's something that I address in my interpersonal relationship. Like I will not stand for like you can't talk to me crazy, any of this kind of thing. I'm not going to say that those men are patriarchal. When we talk about patriarchy, we're talking about a kind of like global system, and in particular economic system that holds power. From the historical lens, Black men have been divested of manhood and have been completely locked out of the patriarchal structure and attaining any power as such. And so I think like these conflations, like people just use these terms misogyny, misogynoir, and patriarchy interchangeably when it's not the case. And I think to speak to that, like Curry's analysis of like bidirectional violence, like again, like I don't talk much about my personal life, but I was in a 10-year relationship and it was an abusive relationship. But I can't just say he was the one abusing me. Like, I was all up in his face, he was all up in my face. Like, it was just sort of that kind of a relationship, unfortunately. And so the violence was like all over the place. And the black families have a lot of this problem. I'm not gonna say that there isn't like a nigga coming home and like, where's my dinner, and just, like doing all this crazy like violent stuff. But it doesn't quite happen that way with us because of the sort of material reality that, black people exist in, because of the uniqueness of the black condition. So I would just say, like, as far as like the kind of androcentric kind of model, I think that when we talk about like sexism, there is, like I said, like a deep like problem. But this sort of like male centered uplifting of like only maleness, this is not a thing. It's not happening. There's sexism, there's misogyny. I've heard people say that there's a sub patriarchy. I wouldn't describe it that way. I would just say that there's a deep misogynistic overtone in our community, but it also, like you said, comes from women. I have also been like at the receiving end of a lot of like, violence of women and things like that. So I've seen women like portray patriarchy or portray like misogyny and things like that, and white women are at the helm of like the patriarchal structure. So I think like we really have to start like drawing like a fine like demarcation line between these different terms and like stop conflating it to like tear down and like justify like the mass imprisonment of just this one particular group of people.
So my
So my
follow-up
follow-up
question would
question.
be, I will say our institutions are set up patriarchally. So the foundational institution of the black community is the black church. It is extraordinarily patriarchal. And most of our institutions, like black colleges, black like what are they called, like social organizations, tend to be modeled after the black church. So this analysis comes from like Cedric Robinson when he's talking about black institutions. Manning Marable talks about this. And so it is a patriarchal structure. And so to me, that's not to say that black people as a group are, or that patriarchy is sort of endogenous to black people, but there is a contradiction. And so I don't know if there is institutionally there's a striving for patriarchy. And again, these institutions are upheld and built by the community, right? So there is that contradiction between black men not really having the material conditions to even uphold a patriarchal order. Because on the one hand, we talk about all these female-headed households, but on the other hand, we talk about patriarchy. There's all of these contradictions, I guess I'll say, right? How would you respond to like the fact that there are some institutions that are sort of foundational to our community that are sort of patriarchal in their structure?
I don't know if I would explain it as a patriarchal structure though. I don't know if I would say, because the black church, there's so much going on in that nucleus. Like, I wouldn't really call it like, I still wouldn't like characterize it as patriarchal. I would definitely say that it's just like an intensified sort of misogynistic structure. Because to me, when you talk about patriarchy, I feel like we're still talking about like a kind of socio-economic kind of breadth that, the black church, you have your, what's the name, TD Jakes type people or whatever the case may be. He's a hot mess. But still, doesn't like fit into that realm of like patriarchal power as such. I can see like the comparison, but for me, I don't think I would still describe it as the black church being like a sort of patriarchal model.
So would you so like what it would you would describe it as, because it's not even, because to me misogyny is also a particular thing. It's like hatred of women and violence against women. I don't know that the Black church is that, but it is if you think about like the actual structure, right? So there's like a head, that's a pastor, then you have like deacons. And so literally the way that it's structured is, because patriarchy is about like male headedness, but it's also about how power is passed down, right? Structurally. And there is a structure to the church. So anyway, I don't mean to belabor this point. And I take your point that perhaps there is it is a, maybe
There's
that's
a contradiction for sure. Like I'm still thinking through what you said. Um, yeah, it's a definite contradiction.
So my question is related to this, but I guess it's maybe asking the kind of it's taking the next step in this question, right? So when I got to the section in the article, which is about like, auto critique or criticism and self criticism as like a required revolutionary practice inside of our organizations, you say that a movement or party that does not build the necessary muscle of revolutionary self inquiry is destined to sink into economism. I can't talk. Peddling reformist policies that serve to strengthen the state under the banner of Marxist Leninism. So, like, continuing this line of thought about one of the distinctions between sort of patriarchy and misogyny, and maybe even connected to that question, like what is salvageable or redeemable about an actual kind of feminism, I wonder what like a model for taking, so like not just the theorizing, which I think is important, but like what does it look like in practice in our organizations to think about the fact that while there might be misogynist attitudes dictating and determining, who takes up, who gets assigned what responsibilities. I'll never forget, like just the battles I've had inside of organizations that I've been a part of, where like it often does fall, I'm not gonna say exclusively, but it often does fall on the women to say things like, okay, if we're gonna meet for 4 hours, we need to think about the fact that some folks got kids that need to be taken care of. We need to think about the fact that meeting for 4 hours means we need to feed people. And then what is decided by that, so this is like something that happened in the party, is like, okay, so then who is responsible for the childcare? Who is responsible for bringing the food? And these are considered these secondary tasks, right? And so they're not primary to what it is, whether it's work study, whether it's a rally, whatever the primary task is, right? These are considered secondary and even sometimes tertiary projects. What does an actual like practice of engaging with the types of misogyny, the types of, and I'll just say gender imbalances that exist inside of our organizations. Like what does it mean to like take seriously that, okay, no, we don't want to replicate these arguments about Black men being foundationally, terroristic or violent. Not the case, but we do want to reckon with the reality that in many instances, because of the societies that we live in, Black men are taking up some problematic notions about how masculinity should function, and it's functioning, and it is dysfunctioning inside of our, our community organizations, our groups. So what might it look like to actually deal with some of those things in practice to you?
Yeah, so without getting into like details or anything, I actually went through something similar in an organization that I'm in where a person was removed for like violent, I would say, like behavior or something like this. And yes, it was the women or non-binary people who kind of stepped up and was like, "Yo, you have to like exit." Um, and I do think these things fall on the women a lot in the organizations. Like you said, there is these things that you have to address. Like, um, yeah, just because you don't like name it like patriarchy doesn't mean that you're just gonna sit back and allow this sort of like rampant like misogyny to take place. Like, um, in my organization, like for me, like I was one of the first people to be like, we have to do something about this. So I feel like for me, like being in organization and doing organizational work, I think how I deal with it is really calling people out, not in a way that is like where people feel ganged up on, but like pulling people aside and saying, listen, the way that you kind of talk is kind of like dictatorial and it's, sexist. And yeah, I had a brother that I had to like really check like her body recently, like um yeah, like I'm just like not the one with the, like with the nonsense, like like I just feel like I have these views where I can say, you know what, we're not going to kind of like uh further add to the kind of asphyxiation of like the black male identity. At the same time, like I am going to be the one to be like step up and be like, no, we're not doing this. You either have to go, or we have to like directly address this. So I think being verbally outspoken, being firm, but I think being firm and being reflective, because a lot of times people are firm and it just comes off really nasty and dismissive. And I really feel like the best way to kind of get across to people is to be firm, reflective, and just be like honest in your organizational work. I think that people do like gravitate to that. Even if I always say, like, my kind of motto is that like if you do what is right for you, it cannot be wrong for anyone else, even if they feel like it's wrong in the moment. Maybe some way, somewhere down the line, 20 whatever years, that they might reflect and say, you know what, this was the right call. So, yeah.
So there's
So
this,
there's this.
or there's a few things. People are very interested in this misogyny versus patriarchy question. But so somebody said, Dante said, masculinity never teaches that care work is useful, necessary, and valued. I've been thinking about this, but I also think it has to do with how we codify care work. Because to me, police patrols and neighborhood patrols are care work. They are just not considered such. Like, people are literally putting their lives on the line vis-a-vis the state to consolidate and protect community. To me, that's care work, right? But for various reasons, for different ideologies, right? Maybe a more masculine ideology, they wouldn't describe it as such because they want to describe it otherwise. Feminists might not describe it as care work because care work is work that's done by women, right? Because of our misunderstanding of like what that looks like. And so I think I don't know that men necessarily devalue care work. I don't know, right? I just think it might not be called that in the way that care looks, perhaps through a sort of masculinist experience. And again, we're being relatively essentialist with this, but it might just look different or be called something different. So I would have to like think more about that. But so Musa says there's a lot of masculine folks engaged in various forms of care work. It's just rarely labeled as such. Exactly. And so anyway, so okay, so the next question. So we're going to pivot a bit. So there's two other things. I don't know if we can put them on the table and so we want to talk about it. So Dante also said the question, what the differentiation between chauvinism and patriarchy. So chauvinism isn't reducible to male. There's like racial chauvinism, male chauvinism. It's literally putting one's group as superior over another. Patriarchy is a system and structure that has to do with the ways that power and resources are passed on through men, right? And power is sort of concentrated in men, right? Or I don't know if y'all have a different definition of patriarchy.
I wanted to raise something too, because the question with the church had me thinking about like the different structures that you were just laying out. But I also remember like I was reading something. I think it's something that someone sent to me, where I was also thinking through this notion of like patriarchy and kinship systems. Like somebody was, I think it was something that someone sent to me on Twitter or something like this, where like when we talk about like Hamas, or we talk about like any other revolutionary groups, there is a sort of patriarchy, like if you want to describe it like that, sort of patriarchal structure, but it's kind of to preserve the organizational and to preserve the sort of like liberation struggle sort of a thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but they kind of employ it. I guess you can see it how it is employed in like a group like the PLO or whatever the case may be, but it's also like a kinship system. So I think like when we think about like racialized men and the way that they kind of carry out their struggles and their kind of generational um, teachings to other groups about the histories of their people, there is a sort of like kind of patriarchal manifestation there. But I think it is more so of a preservation kind of mindset as opposed to I want to rule women kind of mindset. I don't know what y'all was saying.
No, and I would say that too, because the thing is, like, we've largely been having this conversation again in the context of the US. And if we're thinking about Black African people like diasporically, these patriarchal structures are actually quite real. Like when you have familial systems and structures that say, when my brother's wife dies, I take her as a wife, like that, like that she doesn't have any power or control or say over that next decision when decisions are still being made about the inherent value of girl children vis-a-vis boy children and whether or not girl children should be educated. Like these are like, yes, in the context of the US, we are thinking about some other structural contingencies that are different. But if we're thinking about ourselves as African people diasporically, these questions actually do rise to more significant levels when we're actually talking about patriarchal power structures. We're talking about lineage, when we're talking about decision. Like, again, this is historical fiction. This is fiction, but I was reading Nnedi Okorafor's Death of the Author. In the text, the mother's family was Igbo and the father's family was Yoruba, but the tradition, even though they had moved to the United States, they had a whole life, family, children, everything in the US. The tradition of the male's family dictated that the man be buried where the family was, and the mother had no connection to that as a place where she had lived. And like the children are like pissed off and upset about the fact that like their mother's life partner, her best friend, she's lost him not only like in the flesh, but she's also lost this kind of tangible connection to have any control over the decisions about what happens to his body in death, because that's determined by his male family members. Like there are all of these kinds of examples without even going to the most egregious ones like female genital mutilation, all those kinds of things. But there are these kind of cultural norms that do preserve power in male lines, and even as in the household women get to control certain things, there is a distinction between like what those kind of smaller quotidian everyday like decision type making things are, and then those kind of like long lasting generational power. So I do think that it's important. Like obviously context matters, but I think if we are thinking Pan-Africanly as African diasporic people, like we have to think about what are these realities for our people, both in the territorial confines of the US and everywhere else our people are.
Yeah, I would just chime in really quickly. So when I go back to the question about the church, I can say like, just thinking dialectically, I think that yes, there has like a kind of patriarchal kind of preservation of a sort of lineage and sort of generational thing that you want to preserve with the man at the top and the deacons and all these different structures. But I think it's a twofold thing, like I can see it as like a sort of self-preservation within a patriarchal structure, but then I could also see it as like a sort of tension, a sort of like kind of dialectical kind of like tension with that structure and the way that it's set up.
So two things. One thing is that I don't know that all of these, everything is reducible to European colonialism, but what we can say is that more what I would call classical as opposed to pre-colonial, classical sort of patriarchal, even matriarchal structures become deformed when they are conscripted into colonial, imperial rule, and then just external administration. They take on a much, whatever they meant in their sort of grounded cultural reality becomes distorted because they become sort of interpolated into these Western dynamics, right? And so but the other thing, one way, so there was a question about the relationship between patriarchy and misogyny. the one way the comrade explained it is patriarchy is structure, misogyny is superstructure, right? And so that is sort of one way to think about it. So would misogyny exist without a broader, like a sort of governing patriarchy? Because part of what we're talking about is that there is a governing patriarchy, a white hetero Christian patriarchy that subsumes racialized men as well, and that sort of undermines endogenous patriarchal order. That's the broader like framework, right? And so that is how I'd answer that question. Okay, so we're just gonna pivot a little bit because we hold it Khadija at this point. But I want to talk about when you left the CP, right? So in July 2024, you left the CPUSA after 3.5 years, and you wrote what I thought was a very principled resignation letter. So you highlighted issues of racial chauvinism, right deviationism, especially in their support of the Democratic Party, an incomplete fight against fascism that didn't account for liberalism, and then your general feelings of alienation in the party. And you also talked about how like you had waged struggle in the party, and it just, to very little effect. And so your recourse was to leave. So can you talk about first of all, what drew you to the CPUSA and ultimately what drove you away? And then since we're always encouraging folks to join movement organizations, do you have advice for Black people who are looking for a revolutionary home? Like, what should they look for? What types of questions should they ask? How can they evaluate when to wage struggle and when to leave and that type of thing?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, it was heavy. It was a very hard decision to leave the party. Um, like I love them people. Like we don't agree, like but I still really care for those people. Like I left really because I had been, really struggling and really feeling like I was the only one who was like concretely struggling. There were other people with me. I don't know how they're going to feel about me saying this, but there were other people with me who were also, we would, say things and we would back each other up. But I feel like it wasn't enough, like, to really make a change and a difference. Like, we need to really make a fuss, but in a principled way, not just like left, ultra left craziness or whatever the case may be. I left because I went to our big convention where you get to change things at the party, where you get to change the party program. And then I realized there's no actually changing the party program. And I was just like, okay, it's either I just stay and just deal with this, which I was kind of thinking about doing. And just, I was maybe, in 5, 10 years, something will happen. But I was like, and again, I don't know how people are going to feel. I'm just going to be honest. I've seen so many comrades in the party, like veteran comrades, been in the party for like 50, 60 years, and they haven't grown in their politics at all. And I didn't want to be the person, I didn't want to be that. I just didn't want to be in the retrograde with my politics. And honestly, I felt like if I would have stayed, I would just have kind of degenerated um, politically. And that's not to say that there isn't like really astute people, but I think a lot of times what happens in organizations, and Miles speaks a lot to this, like I think on practice, as like you form these friendships, these really close familial friendships because you're spending all your time, but then you get afraid to critique people because if you say something about their adherence to Kamala Harris, they're not gonna like you, and they didn't like me. They didn't like some of these people. They didn't like me, and some of them had problems and things like that. And it really came out at the convention, like I felt it. But I I would still say, like what drew me to the party. Honestly, like I just wanted to get involved with something, and I didn't. I wasn't really knowledgeable in all the different outfits that were out there. And what really drew me to the party, like I always tell the story, like of a wonderful like veteran member that we have in the party who wrote me a letter after I had signed up. She wrote me a handwritten letter and came to my house and slipped the letter under my door. And I was like, who the hell takes all this time to do something like this? And just I mean, the party has so many problems. I mean, everyone knows about the historical problem, but there is something real about the party, and I'll say like the reactionary views, the sort of like I remember a comrade said like the party is a reflection of what's happening like amongst the masses. Like people don't have perfect politics, but it's like at the same time like we are a party, so we have to like set an example of a kind of political astuteness that is represents an advanced element from the masses. We can't just be trailing and be on the same level as the masses. Then why are we a party? We might as well just So all of these questions, I say all of this, and I really hope people don't take it the wrong way. But I had to leave because I wanted to grow. I wanted to grow theoretically. I wanted to grow practically. I wanted to like learn, and I just felt like the party wasn't like providing that space. And when I would push, it would just be like you're pushing this like black thing, and you're being like ultra left, and I just felt like and the thing is, it came from a lot from the black people in the party. I think that was the most, I think to this day, that's the most disturbing thing to me. Because, like, there were people who really did, like, have my back. But I guess the more that I pushed, the more that they felt like I was trying to wreck something. And what I was really trying to do is, like we're a party. This is a historic party. This is the Communist Party. Like, I'm sorry. I have I've been talking a lot, but this is the Communist Party. And so we have to like set an example. We can't just be theoretically like lazy and like making excuses because we don't want to upset people. Like I would just say things, people would be upset, but at least they would respect my stance because I didn't falter and I didn't like cower to like whatever. I was respectful in my critiques, and I tried to like pick my battles. Like I'm not always gonna be like every little thing, but it just got to a point where I really felt like out of place. And I was like, if I'm gonna spend another couple years in here just wasting away like this, I don't want to do that. I just don't see where I'm gonna be going. So yeah, that's what I
So I
was.
mean, my last question kind of builds on that, and it's a really kind of a straightforward question. But it's like, okay, so you've left the party because you also described kind of early experiences of like feeling alienated and isolated because of not having this particular kind of background, like not having a background in some of the texts that they had read. I'm curious about both as an individual, but also like from an organizational kind of structural approach. What are some of your strategies for maintaining optimism? I think like just as a very straightforward kind of question, I wonder like every day I'm navigating this process of like, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago with Michael in particular, but like particularly because I work with students and they're like, the world is falling apart, and obviously like these are all things that have happened before in different kinds of ways. But like, what are some of your strategies as an individual, but also like, what are some of the strategies that you might suggest our audience to engage in, communally, organizationally, to maintain a kind of revolutionary optimism?
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention like join a party, even if the party completely sucks. Like join it, gain some experience and struggle. Because what I find a lot of the time from people who like maybe online a lot and like really politically astute, they don't really understand what party dynamics are. It's not that you just all the time have the best take. Like, it's not about always having the best take. Like, these are real people, real dynamics. And so, even though, like, there was a lot of hard times, like, I could say that I learned a lot from the party. And the party, you know, when you're in a party, like, the party really does like lift you up. Like, we had a convention in Chicago. I would have never been able to go if it wasn't for the party. Like, they took care of me. So I would say, like, join a party, gain some experience, and really struggle. Don't like just be in the party for like 2 months and be like, feel like you know everything and you want to come in there and change people's whole program. Like, this is record behavior. They really be engaged, like, in, you know, the day-to-day inner workings of the party, like, for at least a few years before you decide, like, you you feel like you have to leave. I would say, like, what maintains optimism for me, like, a few years ago, I want to say almost about a decade ago, I I started like really getting into like Hindu and like Buddhist philosophy and like Sufism and sorry, all these different like kind of philosophies and things really helped me they really helped me like look internally, and they really helped me like cultivate like a sort of like introspective, like more introspective, more like inward analysis. So we're like, I can see, sorry, I don't like my connection is a little bit laggy, but it just gave me the tools to be able to like, I'm not perfect, and you know I still have like a lot of problems, but it still like gave me the tools to delve a little bit more deeper, like when I'm dealing with problems, with like social problems, or like, because I think like even if you have the best take in the best politics, if you're not like, if you don't know how to self critique, then you're not going to function in any sort of organization, and you're just not going to function for very long in this society. So I think you have to kind of develop the muscle of like self critique and like self introspection. So that really helped me, like, because even when things get really crazy in the organization, I have to like kind of pull back and like give myself some time to kind of like really like turn inward. And even though like it's an inward, but it's like for like a collective sort of response and a collective understanding. It's not separate from like a kind of communal thing. So those are the things that help me, and just like being with my comrades, learning with my comrades, and just study, because study is so critical. Just learning new things, things that I don't even understand. Like, just the other day, I was just like, you know, reading Ilyankov, who's a Soviet philosopher who wrote an essay about Spinoza's philosophy on like the attributes and modes. And I can tell you, like, I know all about like Spinoza. I'm not as, you know, but like I really enjoy just the process of learning and just being patient with myself, and just just gaining like a deeper understanding, like, and how that could, and how like, because I don't think people realize it, but Buddhist and Hindu and like Sufi philosophy and these things, even like Christian mysticism, they're deeply dialectical. They don't use the terms, but if you like read into the text, like it's the same sort of, they kind of build on contradiction is like the main kind of thing. So I think honestly, if it wasn't for these texts, I would not been able to really understand like Hegelian dialectic or like Marxist dialectic. So personally, those are the things that help me, so I can help other people.
Mhm. So continuing on with
So
that,
continuing on with that,
I just want to ask you about reading, right? Because it can be prevalent online and in some organizing spaces to condemn the call to read as like elitist or chauvinist or a means for like too academic, right? But you've shared like in various places that, so you self-identify as a poor Black woman who reads, and you've talked about reading at the bus stop, when you worked at the wig shop, reading. And so can you just talk can you talk about like what your reading practice is, like how you make time and reserve energy to read, and then how you're able to navigate complex like Marxist or other theory, even though you're sort of like you're an organic intellectual, you don't have this college degree. And there's a lot of people in college who are not that bright. So, but you are, you're very brilliant in the way that I'm sure as an insult, people have probably tried to call you an academic. They do it to Erica all the time because they assume that if you know shit and you have a particular access to language, you're an academic. But can you talk about like, how do you read? How do you make time? How do you conserve energy? And then how do you sort of navigate complex theory?
Yeah, so like I, I really think it's critical to study, and I just read as much as I can every day. I don't like set like huge unrealistic goals for myself, but if I can read like a couple of pages out of like some sort of Lacerdo book or an article, Black Agenda article, like just build. First, I think what people miss is just building the muscle to read, because reading is an exercise. You have to like kind of train yourself, and if you fall out of the habit for a couple of years, it's kind of like a muscle. You kind of have to retrain your attention. So I think starting off with like 10 to 15-minute blocks, and then kind of building your stamina and your attention span from there. um I think people also feel like they have to read like a lot, and I think even if you get through a couple of pages of a book, but you're constantly like keeping engaged with things, I think that that's important. Maybe you can't finish like 20 books a year, but even if you finish like 3 to 5 books, but you really deep read and you really spend time with it, as opposed to like just reading just to say like I've read X and X amount of books, and when somebody asks you, well, what is it about, you can't even explain because you was just like breezing through things. I think that's more valuable. So yeah, I didn't finish college, but um, I guess I've always been interested in like learning and writing, and yeah, I say like poor Black, but I don't know why I say these things, but I just like describe myself like I'm just a homegirl, like I'm just like regular from from Flatbush, and I'm just I just also happen to be like really interested in learning about like Agamben philosophy of like bare life or whatever the case may be. Like I think it's important to be well rounded, because all of the greatest thinkers, from Lenin to Spinoza to um, you know, Huey, like all of these, they read vast, vastly different things. So it's like I always tell people be like, "Oh, I read Huey, I read Fred Hampton, and like I'm good." I said, "No, I want to read what Huey read, and then I want to read, whoever Huey read. I want to go and read. I want to read the lineage. So I want to read Marx. I want to read Hegel. I want to read Feuerbach. I want to read Kant. I was like, let me read the whole canon down to Aristotle. I just want to read and see, like, I want to learn, because there is a kind of dialectical relationship, and they are building off of each other. So I want to see, like, what's there. And so that's just like how I stay engaged. And like, even when I was working at the hair store, like I remember precisely reading Capital and reading the section where Marx was like, you work 12 hours for yourself and you work another 12 hours for the capitalist, but you don't notice because the necessary labor time and the surplus labor time glide into each other. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I can't believe this motherfucking nigga is making me work for free. And like get it like all tight, like all by myself, like, So I don't know. I just feel like don't read to like impress people, or don't read to like make yourself feel like like all this kind of pretentious thing. Just read to gain understanding, and then little by little you'll see like the joy in it. Like sometimes joy doesn't come immediately from something. Sometimes you have to grow in your understanding to pull the nutrients from something first. So that's kind of like philosophically like how I approach it.
And that reading something once doesn't mean that you got it. I mean, like, I this is something I tell my students all the time. Like, there are things that I've read 7 times, and I have a different takeaway every time I read it. And that some things are harder to read than others. So like even the like the false kind of goal setting of like a certain number of pages a day, like reading 15 pages in a novel is not the same thing as reading, Hortense Spiller's Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe. Like that, it's like they're different types of text and they require different types of things. And so I think it is important to Musings and Bloom's point to like be able to talk with other folks about what you read, both because of the hoarding, but I know like for me, it's just as a practice, because I am a dialogic learner, there are things that I don't even realize that I've grasped when I read until I talk them out with somebody else, until somebody else brings out that point. And so I think that, those are all really helpful and useful things to think about the importance of reading.
I'll just add to that, and it's funny you mentioned like Hortense Spiller. Yeah, I was reading like Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, and I still have like a few pages left to finish for like a couple months now. And I love the way she writes. Like I'm like kind of into that kind of thing. Like I just love the way she writes, and I kind of gravitate towards it. But I would just also say sometimes like when you read, you can't explain things right away. But you understand like how can I explain like there's a deeper sort of intelligence going on where you don't have to always verbalize everything like down to like the kind of minute whatever. Just because you can really explain things really well doesn't mean that you understand. Sometimes it's the people that it is just a kind of primordial sort of intrinsic understanding that you may not be able to verbalize, but you know, and that's just as important, if not maybe higher, sort of intelligence than just being able to rattle off like information about things.
That's definitely me. It's hard for me to explain shit. Like I know, like it is. It's like because I understand, like I know what I'm talking about, but it's very hard to explain. Which is why it's something that like I work hard at, and I think that the best teachers probably are good at explaining stuff, but it's just because of the way that my mind works, I think, because like when I think of a thing, everything I've ever read about that thing flashes into my mind. And so sometimes I get like caught up in my words. I'm trying to explain all the things that come at once. It's like an eidetic memory, I think it's called, or something. And so it is difficult, right? But it's something that I work on because I definitely want, as I want to be able to I don't want to hoard knowledge, right? It's like I don't need to demonstrate mastery of a thing. I read because I feel like my historical task is as a sort of knowledge producer and as somebody like I need to contribute this to movement, and movement helps inform what I do. And so it is something that I work at, but it is difficult and it can be I get frustrated, right? And I don't and that I'm sure that could be off putting for people, but it just because it's like, bruh, I'm trying to like right? I just be like, but yeah. So I appreciate everything.
Not you glitching.
I just want to say I identify that with that so much because it's really hard for me to explain things too, and sometimes like that's why I'm like always so backed up on my writing. Like I have a piece that's I think it's almost ready to go about the African blood brotherhood, but because like sometimes I feel like, and this is another thing, I feel like people sometimes feel like intimidated because they don't know stuff, but it's like just continue to learn. Like even if you put out a piece and it leaves out certain things, you can go back and you can like, learn from what you didn't add and what you didn't write. and I do struggle with like explaining myself, but I'm trying. My Twitter helps me to kind of like streamline my thoughts a little bit more.
All right, Khadija, we have kept you like for 2 hours. Thank you so much. I feel like this was such a like a theoretical but also practical conversation. There's so many takeaways. Hopefully people will run it back, and hopefully you'll come on again to talk about other things you've written or just other issues that come up.
Yes, I second that for coming, and I enjoyed our conversation.
I was really looking forward to it. I remember I told Sharice like I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm really happy that I was able to come on here and yeah, like I just you guys are really down to earth, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to like come and kind of talk about some personal things, political things, because yeah, like this kind of shared space with women and just being vulnerable. Um, we don't necessarily have, and I haven't felt that, and I just want to say thank you, thank you.
Of course.
You. And we will stay in conversation with one another.
Absolutely. Bye.
Hit me up anytime. Bye.
We is 2 hours and 15 minutes in, and we still got a whole nother section. So what I do want to lift up Musa.
Yes.
I do want to lift up Musa and but the rest of the stuff, I don't know if you wanted to talk about NC State. But basically, so Musa's in the chat, and so Musa could probably add on more. But basically, they fucking with the comrade, and we can't stand for that. So do you want to, I don't know if you want to put it up on the screen.
I can.
Okay. So for those who haven't heard, basically Musa got hemmed up at the border coming back from Tampa after visiting Cuba, was harassed, patted down, got their electronics taken away, and basically their fucking human rights violated. So I don't know. Should we read through the whole thing?
Yeah, we can. So this statement from Musa, an activist and journalist who was targeted by DHS, detained, and had their devices seized. Returning from international travel, Musa was detained and interrogated for over 3 hours at Tampa International Airport, had their phone and computer confiscated. Okay. On Tuesday, April 8th, oh, this is from Musa. On Tuesday, April 8th, I was unlawfully detained and interrogated by U.S. Customs and Border Protection at Tampa Airport while returning to the United States from international travel. I was told that most of your rights are suspended because this airport is border crossing, including my right to a lawyer. I was interrogated by a counterterrorism agent and treated like a criminal and a terrorist. Synonyms that Empire has long made interchangeable with being Black, Muslim, and politically active. For over 3 hours, I was held without access to legal counsel, aggressively questioned, patted down, and subjected to an invasive growing search. My passport was taken, all of my belongings were searched, and eventually my devices, my cell phone, and laptop were seized without justification. After seizing my devices, 3 CBP agents attempted to coerce me into powering on the devices and surrendering my device passwords. When I refused, which I knew was my right to, they were visibly aggravated. Their targeting was not random. It was retaliation for supporting a friend, an international student activist targeted by the Trump administration, as they made the difficult but legal decision to leave the country rather than face prolonged detention for free speech. Returning from a trip to Cuba, one of many fully legal visits I've taken over the years, and my solidarity organizing on behalf of Palestinian liberation were used as the basis for the politically motivated interrogation. CBP agents asked whether I had received so-called military training in Cuba or the Middle East, questioned if I was involved in political activity on the island, and pressed me for information on my potential connections to several foreign students and professors engaged in Palestinian solidarity. From my first interaction with an aggressive CBP agent whose entire tone shifted after reading my name on my passport to overhearing others saying he's not going anywhere for a while, and witnessing multiple agents whisper and yell about me, it was clear they intended to intimidate me and extract information to expand their repression, even if it meant trampling my alleged rights. This experience is part of a broader pattern across administrations. DHS has operated as a politically charged agency to escalate surveillance, harassment, and criminalization of individuals involved in movements for justice, liberation, and in this case, against genocide. Now we're witnessing a dangerous heightening of this weaponization. While the repression of immigrants and foreign students is rightly drawing public attention, my experience confirms that US citizens, especially Black and Muslim ones, are also targets. As activists and legal professionals have loudly warned, the repression of international students has served as a testing ground through which the rest of us are increasingly vulnerable and within the crosshairs. On Tuesday, April 15th, we filed a motion in federal district court in Florida to demand the immediate return of my devices and information related to my data accessed by the government. I am sharing this information to share what happened to me, and importantly, to issue a broad warning: the state is escalating. Be strategic, brave, and smart in equal measures. Protect one another, because no part of this system, nor what is to come, is designed to protect us. Activists and organizers should document everything, travel with secondary phones, leave laptops at home, and memorize the number to legal counsel and trusted individuals. When crossing a border, attending a protest, or going through customs, power down your devices, use encrypted messaging software, and use strong numeric passwords instead of biometric ones. Create emergency contingency plans within your organizations and networks, and remember, you have the right to remain silent at all times. And build networks of legal and communal defense protocols that anticipate the level of repression that is our reality. What happened to me could happen to anyone, and it is a chilling reminder that these agencies are not designed to merely police borders, they police dissent.
All righty. So don't we posted Musa's link in the chat, help out the comrade. And we're not gonna go into this stuff, but I just want to lift up, make sure you check out the Howard University encampment. I think it got broken up earlier this morning, but they may be sort of regrouping. Check out the student protest at North Carolina Central University over living conditions on campus. Somebody just put in the chat that they were watching the video and a Black woman with the Palestinian flag got tackled.
Yep.
Look into the president of Namibia, Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah, sorry for butchering that name, and sort of there's a little bit of a controversy about whether or not she actually deported 500 U.S. nationals. And
she's saying she not deporting people. She just changed visa regulations.
Right. She changed the visa regulations, to look into that. The opening of the Thomas Sankara Center in Niger. Burkina Faso shared passports. And then whether the end of AGOA or I forget what it is. It's like, it's a trade relationship between the United States and Africa that is sort of supposed to come to an end in September, but is being imperiled by these tariffs that Trump is starting and pausing like a fucking loser. But anyway, and how it's impacting African countries, and whether or not this is an opportunity for self-determination, because we know all these trade agreements come with strings attached, and expropriation, imperialism, extraction, all those things. So those are things to look out for. Thank you for sticking with us for 2 hours and 22 minutes.
Yes, those were all part of our revolution section that if the interview didn't go long, we would have talked about more. But
yes.
And also, I just want to say, CBS, you don't usually share personal background. And so it is making me think about our different relationships to feminism, because you talked about, your particular experiences with like homosocial spaces with women. And I think that in the reverse, because I grew up in a male dominated family. And when I say male dominated, I literally just mean numbers. I'm not talking about patriarchy, whatever. And I think that I had to engage in an intentional process of seeking out female homosocial spaces. So.
That's exactly what I was thinking about when because I was thinking about so much of our politics has to do with like our social and material conditions. And so either it could go either way. So it's like, if you're poor, you can either be like, I'm gonna be a capitalist no matter what, or it's like, I'm a socialist because fuck all this shit. And so for me, growing up around and my various experiences with not only just women, but just with striving for a framework to understand all this stuff. It's my relationship to feminism. But thanks, y'all. All 100 of you. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to see Sinners tonight, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, no spoilers.
I won't, but we'll see. I love vampire movies.
Last question: do you think Michael B. Jordan is getting better at acting? Yes or no? Or
I thought he was a good actor when he was Wallace at 14.
I think he was good at Wallace, and then when he was in the military movies, kind of backtracked a little bit.
Oh yeah. But see, that's the thing. Like, I'm not a Michael B. Jordan fan. Like, I'm not like, oh, I gotta see what Michael B. Jordan is in. Like, I just like there are some things that he's in that I think he does a good job in, and then there are others that I'm like, whatever. So.
The chat is
they're like, no,
pulling out the Apollo hook on you, sis, because it is unilateral news.
Listen, Wallace had me in my feelings. I was very sad about Wallace.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, Wallace was sad. Yeah, Wallace was sad. I liked Killmonger. I thought he got a raw deal in the analysis, man. I really rated with Killmonger. Anywho, he buff. So,
but see, yeah, Michael B. Jordan, he ain't the type that do it for me. So even my liking him or not liking him in this particular instance ain't got nothing to do with his aesthetics, because I'm not a Michael B. Jordan fan. Although I did have a dream about Aldous Hodge the other day, and that came out of nowhere.
Who is the man that they compared him to? Well, it wasn't Lionel Richie, but it was some other type singer that they said like Michael B. Jordan looked like, and they were like, "No, I can't unsee it."
Who?
Lamont Sanford. No, but is it Lamont Sanford? It's like some well, it was somebody in an R&B pose that
in the R&B pose. Wait, Lamont Sanford.
No, Lamont Sanford, it's not him. It's some other. Maybe it wasn't. No, it wasn't. I don't know. But anyway, I'm buff. It don't mean he could ask. Humble brag. I ain't seen you in person. I don't know that to be true.
Oh man. Okay. Well.
Okay. Well. Anyway. All right, y'all. Now we just kikiing. So we'll
yes.
Later. Thank you.
All right, y'all. See y'all next time.
Bye. I ended it.
Okay.